rigid body, we're just going to keep the cube, and we're just going to move it up, and we're going to take it, and we're going to assign a soft body modifier to it. We're going to turn off soft body goal, and in edges we're going to change the bending to 10, and then we need a ground plane for this to actually hit. So we're going to add a plane, scale that up, add collision to that, and at this point all we do is we just hit play, and you see how it kind of looks a little bit like looks like a jello. And let's turn the bending down, so let's see what happens when we do 5. Go down, and you can see that it jiggles back and forth. So there's a lot of settings you can do this, but this is just basic. The idea is you can take an object, and if you decrease the bending and we do something like 0, I go to redo it. Now you can see it basically jiggles around even more. So the bending basically kind of controls the stiffness, and you can see at that point there's no stiffness, so the entire geometry basically fell flat. If we go back and do that to something like 4, and do it now, it's going to stick together and wiggle around, but you can see there's a lot more stiffness, and what it is determining how stiff each one of these corners is and how to set it up. So there's a lot of things you can do to kind of play around with this. But kind of get an idea of different ways you can do it. Now with this one, you would, there's actually a soft body cache for when you render, and you would actually want to save that. So by default this is located, and right now it's going to, you see this little orange with the dots, that's the cache that's calculating it. If you don't want to play the animation the whole time, you'd want to decrease this amount, and then you just hit bake and it'll reserve it and it'll save it. So that's basically how you do that to save time and get it so it actually renders. And then the very last thing we're going to look at is a fluid. And this one can be kind of processor intensive. I'll go through the steps. I'm not going to have time to render it out, but I'll explain how to do it. So we're just going to make a cup. So I'm going to get rid of the ground plane. I'm going to add a cylinder. Let's go into edit mode, grab the very top, and we'll do a inset faces, and just a little bit, so that's basically the thickness of the glass, and I'm going to E for extrude, and I got to change my selection, E for extrude, and pull that down, and now we have a basic glass. Obviously you can spend more time looking at it, but just to get the basics, I'm also going to just make it smooth to get it set up, and now we have a basic object. So this is going to be our container. So what we do with the with the fluid, we go in, we're going to make this part of fluid, and we want to make this an obstacle, which basically means that the fluid is going to calculate, so it's a collision. We want to add a material to this. We'll make it so we can see the water actually moving into it. So we're going to knock the diffuse intensity all the ways down, set the specular to Phong, and the intensity to 0.5, which it's already at. Hardness, we'll leave that where it is. We're going to toggle on transparency, set that to ray trace, and set the alpha to 0.25. And index of refraction to 1,1, that's what bends the light. And I think, do we have got anything else on that? Depth to 3, and the reason why we want this is if not, when we get the reflection, we're going to have these weird artifacts. That's basically the number of times it bounces the ray back and forth. The same with the mirror, which is your reflectivity. You want to increase that to 3, because if not, you're not going to have self-reflection. And we'll set this to 0.1. And the other thing we need to do with both of these, well, all of these, is we got to make sure that we do receive transparent, because if not, when you go to render, it's not going to work. So let's see what this looks like. So probably won't see much at this point, but you can see we kind of have our basic glass object that's showing up that we can utilize. Okay, so now we have our glass. We can start to do some more work with it. Obviously adjusting specularity, all those types of things. There's a lot of other work you can do to make this look more realistic, but for the time being this is fine for what we need. Okay, so I want to animate this actually turning or pouring, so I'll create a keyframe right here. So animation, and we just need this for rotation. Okay, and now let's advance this to 40. And at that point, we're just going to rotate it down like this and add our second keyframe. Okay, so you can see very simple animation. We're basically just going to pour the fluid out of the glass. So the water is actually pretty easy to add because we have the glass set up. And actually, no, let's just rename this glass. Okay, so now we're going to add another object, and this is just going to be a UV sphere, and we're going to make this. This is basically the blob of water, so this is where the water is going to start and be created, and you want to make sure that this is inside the whatever container you want, and basically in the first couple frames it's going to melt. So that's what we need to do. Now for the water, the only thing we need to do is enable the physics on that, and we want to say that this is basically the fluid. So this is the source. We don't do anything else with that. We just want to make sure it's not intersecting with anything. I'm going to add a tabletop. So let's go back to, so let's add another object, a plane, and make that nice and big. And let me turn on solid so I can actually see where it is. And we're going to want that to be below the ground. So we can pour the water. And the final thing we need is we're basically going to add a cube, and you could keep the default cube for this as well. And we're going to assign that to fluid, and this is going to be what's called the domain. And the domain is the container, if you will, for the whole simulation. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that the water will not go outside of this. So we want to make sure that it's big enough that the water has lots of area to kind of splash and move around. If not, it might look a little fake, because what will happen is the water will actually splash up on the edges. So we have that all set up. We got the domain set. We set that to the domain. I'm going to change the background to black. Okay, so we got that. Actually, you know, I'm going to set that to white. That's going to be easier. I'm going to assign a material to the table just so it kind of shows up a little different and we don't have everything the same color. And let's just crash up this thing. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we got green surface. We got background changed. And now what we're ready to do is basically to do the simulation. So we're going to select the domain and go, and what we want to do is we actually want to do a bake. And what you're going to see is there's a temp location, which is a folder. This is how many seconds it's going to do it. So right now we're saying that we want to do 4 seconds of the animation, which if this is at 24 frames a second. Okay, so we're going to basically bake this. So if we do bake, it's going to take a little bit of time to actually do. Actually, I went through and did it pretty quickly. So you can see up here that's actually, there's a timer, so it kind of takes a while. And I'm going to let this finish up and then I'll come back. Okay, so let's take a look at the simulation now that it's done. Okay, so there's the water. It's kind of spilled out. You can see everything's kind of working. If we go back and forth, we can see the water basically going back up into the container and falling out. And let's go back to camera. And then the other thing we want to do, now if we select this, you'll see originally this was associated with the sphere. We actually don't need the sphere once the baking's done. So the sphere you can hide. You don't want it rendered out, you don't want it showing up. So now we have the cube. The water is actually assigned to the domain now that it's baked. If you unbake, you'll have to change that back. So the material that the cube is set to will actually define what the water looks like. So we'll knock the intensity off. We'll keep the specularity. I'll change it over to Phong so it's a little shinier. Transparency, go over to ray traced. Alpha, let's check this to 0.1. Index of refraction, we'll leave that where it is. We'll give it a little bit of reflectivity, so let's do 0.1. We want to make sure the depth is up to 3, and the same with this. And then the big important one is to make sure this serves receive transparent. We also forgot to do that with the tabletop, so the transparency, so we got to turn that on. So if things look a little funny, make sure that you have both those on. So let's render this image out and see what we have now. So here's an example of the final rendering. You can see the water. We have the glass tilting and the water coming out, and then we would, if we want to do an animation, we'd basically have to play through the entire thing, which will take a while, or we can just use a still. So that completes all the dynamic tutorials.